I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. Fantasia tearing itself apart in the War of Succession. I've watched Percy Jackson fall from the Gateway Arch bathed in Chimeran fire. All of these moments will be lost in adaptation. Like tears in the rain. Time to do Blade Runner. Hello beautiful watchers and welcome back to Lost in Adaptation. I am the Dom. In this episode we'll be taking a look at Sir Ridley Scott's neo-noir dystopian masterpiece Blade Runner and the Philip K. Dick post-apocalyptic science fiction novel that inspired it, namely Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Yeah, I probably would have changed the title too. Ah, Dick, you really haven't had a lot of luck with accurate adaptations of your work, have you? Yes, they will get their own episodes at some point, don't rush me. Now, despite him being considered one of the most influential science fiction writers of the 20th century, a certain amount of diplomacy is required when talking about the late Philip K. Dick. Let's just say that psychological breakdowns, mental disorders, and paranormal hallucinations are a big recurring theme in his books, and he had quite a lot of first-hand experience in these matters. So Ridley Scott probably doesn't even need an introduction, partly because of films like Blade Runner, but just in case, he was the guy who did the thing with the alien, the one with the gladiator, and the film where the Black Hawk goes down, amongst many, many others. Having seen the film first as a slightly horrified child, I had a slightly pessimistic expectation of ties to the book, as most descriptions of the film sported the qualifier loosely based on a novel by Philip K. Dick. Yeah, in a world where movies like Starship Troopers and Percy Jackson feel they can get away with saying they're actually based on their books, when another film is willing to admit its connection to its novel may be a little tenuous, it doesn't exactly fill you with confidence. However, even though my plans to do Blade Runner was one of the reasons I set up the in-name only clause in the first place, I had to concede that it just escaped such a branding. Barely. It was very, very close, but there were just too many general similarities and even some dialogue that was lifted right out of the book for it to earn itself a complete disassociation from the novel. Over the years, 7 different cuts of this film have been made as Sir Ridley and the studio wrestled for creative control of the project. For multiple reasons, I selected the final cut to use for this comparison. In both versions, Deckard makes his living retiring, i.e. killing, rogue androids that have come to Earth illegally. Even though the androids in question are fully sentient and almost entirely organic, they lack even basic human rights. Even killing a legal android that's just minding its own business is only considered destruction of property, punishable by a fine at most. In both the film and the book, the plot centers around Deckard being given the task of tracking down and retiring an unusually large amount of androids that have recently smuggled themselves to Earth. It was possible in both versions for the androids to not know that they were robots, having been implanted with false childhood memories. The technique of using a device called the Void Comp that measures the involuntary emotional reactions of a test subject to determine if they are an android or not is in the book, and the film even uses some of the original questions word for word. In both versions, Deckard starts his investigation by visiting the head of the company that manufactures the android and discovers that the guy's personal assistant is in fact an android herself, albeit a particularly advanced and attractive model. This information appears to come as a bit of a shock to her in both scenarios. Also true to the books is the androids manipulating help out of a far too trusting human. In both versions, Deckard starts out as a man just doing his job and starts to develop a much closer connection with his prey and becomes more sympathetic towards them. He even realizes he has romantic feelings towards someone he knows is a robot. Of course, this doesn't stop him from killing them all in both versions, but, you know, baby steps. So yeah, while this section is undeniably short, it's not completely empty. However, the real meat of the episode is clearly going to rest in the terminology is given a badass upping in the film. The Andes become the replicants, the bounty hunters become the Blade Runners, and the Rosen Corporation becomes the Tyrell Corporation. Wait, that's not any cooler. Why would they do that? The film partakes of the time-honoured, unwilling hero being brought out of retirement because he's the only man who can do the job cliché. However, in the novel, Deckard was positively giddy to receive the assignment, seeing as bounty hunting was his full-time job and the prospect of such a sudden windfall of bounty money. In the film, the police were worried that the Nexus 6 robots would develop their own emotions after a few years, thus invalidating the Void comp test. However, originally the concern was that certain mental health issues like schizophrenia would provide a false result and get a human retired by accident. You would never catch anyone in the book eating meat or anything pretending to be meat. Due to the effects of the new religion that's taken over and the depopulation of almost all life on the planet, all living things are now considered sacred. Yeah, you hear that, vegetarians? You eventually won. But at what cost? Another obvious change is the introduction of the "is Deckard a replicant or not" mystery in the film. In the book, Deckard's definitely a human. He has a wife, regular medical checkups, and uses the Void comp machine on himself at one point. The human status of another bounty hunter he meets is temporarily in question, but it turns out that even he is not an empathyless android, just a regular human arsehole. And please don't bother telling me that Deckard definitely is a replicant. You're telling me they had the chance to build the ultimate Blade Runner and decided the best way to go was to make him an alcoholic, grumpy, lazy reclusive with no hand-to-hand combat skills? Come on! No! I don't care if Sir Ridley officially outed him, he doesn't get to weigh in 30 years later and just stop the argument. The motivations of the rogue robots has changed slightly for the film. The short 4-year lifespan is generally accepted by the Andes as depressing but unavoidable. Their goal wasn't to extend their lives, it was simply to have lives. They just didn't want to be owned by people anymore. If you think Deckard being married in the novel means there isn't a scene where he bangs Rachel, you'd be wrong. However, it was significantly less rapey in the book. It turns out she intentionally seduced him because she always secretly knew that she was an Andy and had learned from multiple past experiences that bounty hunters tended to lose their will to kill her kind if she bonked them. Unfortunately, Deckard proved to be one of the few exceptions to this. It's interesting to note that, in the novel, sex with androids is considered taboo on the same level as doing it with animals, meaning Pris wasn't a sex bot, which I think shows Dick was already pretty seriously disconnected from reality at this point. If something ever gets invented that looks human and feels human and can be built to order, of course people are gonna want to have sex with it. I don't care what world wars have happened or what religions have sprung up, it's man's basic nature to want to put his penis in everything. So Ridley understood this. The film had Roy, the PTSD warbot, but in the book it seems that war and large-scale fighting in general has been put on hold for a while while the human race recovers from the collective hangover of World War Terminus. None of the androids prove to be much of a match for Deckard in the book. He kills pretty much all of them without sustaining a single injury. The Japanese watchdog and his origami fixation are another film-only addition. In fact, I don't recall there being any Japanese culture in the film either. That was a bit of Ridley Scott creativity. The Tyrell obsession with Egyptian architecture wasn't in the book, however the synthetic owl they have is. They tried to be dicks and convince Deckard it was real and use it to bribe him to stop making things difficult for their company. An actual living owl would have been priceless in this world because, for some reason, they were the first species to go extinct when the world went sour. Pris's creepy makeup is film only. Her weird trait in the book was that she didn't seem to realise it was unusual that she answered the door topless. Most significantly, she was also an exact copy of Rachel in the book. They both came off the same assembly line. At the end, she tries to use his feelings towards Rachel to get close enough to kill him, but he was like, nope. The book managed to achieve a somewhat surreal, timeless, yet futuristic feel. In contrast, the film just oozes 80s from every orifice. J.F. Sebastian goes by the name J.R. Isidore in the book. He's actually the other main character of the story, and a goodly amount of the book is told from his perspective. The main difference between Sebastian and Isidore is that Sebastian's a simple-minded, brilliant genetic designer, and Isidore's a simple-minded, adequate van driver. He's another fine example of only half adapting someone. They wanted to keep him naive enough to be easily manipulated by the replicants, but they also wanted to tie him into the new plot involving the replicants trying to get to their creator, so his character ended up being stupid and genius at the same time. He was originally only involved in the plot because he happened to be living in the abandoned building that Pris chooses to hide in, and he befriends her out of loneliness. Oh, and he doesn't die in the book. I probably should have mentioned that sooner, sorry. Now, obviously, because he wasn't originally tied to the android making corporation, his home wasn't full of okay. Sorry, it's just, you know, those things. Fuck! Final fun fact on him, Isidore seemed to believe that he once had the magic power to bring animals back from the dead, and the government took it away from him by blasting his brain with radiation, but we only have his word on it that that actually happened. The first female Andy that Deckard advertised as an opera singer as opposed to an erotic dancer. Huh. Between that and Pris being turned into a sex bot, there seems to be an almost Michael Bay level of unnecessary sexualization going on here. What the bloody hell? Okay, apparently comparing Ridley Scott to Michael Bay can bring about the apocalypse. Sorry about that, everyone. So the events of the book take place after World War III, or as it's referred to in the book, World War Terminus. Earth is pretty much buggered. A blanket of radioactive dust surrounds the whole planet, slowly killing everything. Fallout reports are made daily like the weather. Men tend to wear lead codpieces to reduce the chance that their next mandatory physical will discover that they've picked up enough of a mutation to declassify them as human. Because of this, massive amounts of people have left Earth for the colonies on Mars and other planets. Everyone still lucky enough to be classed as human has access to what is essentially a free drug vending machine. Apparently in the future, scientists will have refined pharmaceuticals so much that complete and total control over one's chemical brain becomes possible. You can input a code and get a stimulant for pretty much anything. Optimism, determination, enthusiasm, relaxation, level-headedness, good humour, creativity, productivity, competitiveness. There seems to be thousands of options to choose from. This is an interesting concept, but I don't really think Dick really explored it as well as he could have. In the book it's used like coffee or nicotine or any other legal drug that helps you get through the day, but can you imagine what effect having access to a device like this would actually have on society? For starters, how has this not caused rampant crime? I hate to come back to the subject of date rape so quickly, considering how unpopular it was in Who Framed Roger Rabbit, but you're giving everyone access to drugs that can give you almost complete control over another person! That actually comes up in a very minor and completely ignored way in the novel. Deckard tells his wife he's getting her a pick-me-up stim, but instead slips her a dose of be submissive to your husband drug. Deckard is given a brief and surreal glimpse into what life might be like for an android when he ends up in a police station that's been pretty much taken over by them and they collectively mess with his head. After he's finished retiring all the Andes, Deckard drives out into the nearby wasteland and decides that he's Jesus. I'm quite tempted just to leave it at that, but instead I guess I'll describe Mercerism. Shortly after the huge mass exodus from Earth, these things called empathy boxes started showing up everywhere. It's some sort of psychic link. If you touch it, you temporarily fuse your consciousness with a guy called Wilbur Mercer. You find yourself perpetually climbing a hill with this pseudo-Jesus. He gives you some sage advice while some assholes you can't see throw rocks at you. If you're hit, somehow the pain and injury manifests itself in the real world as well. The solar system is divided up between people who are convinced he's a supernatural being from another world come to save humanity's souls, and people who think the moon behind him looks kinda like it's painted onto a wall and the rocks being thrown at him look suspiciously plastic. The fundamentals of his teaching apparently include respect life above all else, show empathy and compassion to all, and generally be nice to people. Could use a few more religions like that now, to be honest. Mercerism is one of the key reasons it really sucks to be an Andy. Being considered not truly alive and lacking the ability to feel empathy for others due to some impossible to explain flaw in their programming, they are completely unprotected by the no-killing rule, and few humans have any reason to show them any kindness. Unsurprisingly, if an undercover Andy ever found himself able to slip into a position of power, he tended to oppose Mercerism quite enthusiastically. Just before Deckard corners the remaining rogue androids, a big shot TV personality who's one of those undercover robots does a big expose on Mercer and claims he's definitively proven he's a fraud. Mercer turned out to just be a virtual computer program created to help keep the world placid while humanity rebuilt after the war. He even tracks down the actor who was originally used to create his image. However, this revelation doesn't prove to be as earth-shattering as the androids had probably hoped. Oh Mercer, are you really just a big hoax? Well, okay, yes, but think about it, isn't life actually better with everyone being nicer to everyone else? Oh yeah. A good point actually, you can totally keep on being the Messiah. And, even more confusingly, considering he just openly admitted to being a hoax, he actually turns up outside of the virtual reality to talk to Deckard. Am I doing the right thing? Yes, you should definitely kill those androids. Really? Indeed. It's all good. I don't know if this is in order to make the final conclusion of Mercer's divine status ambiguous, or just to highlight how nuts Deckard has become, but either way it's fucking weird, and the reason Deckard has his religious epiphany at the end of the novel. While the expose scene is playing out, the book interposes an extremely graphic description of one of the androids cutting the legs off a spider to see if it can get around on just 4. Up until this point, I have to admit I wasn't really seeing why Philip K. Dick was such a big deal, but this was, without a shadow of a doubt, one of the most disturbingly well-written, off-putting scenes I've ever encountered in a book. It completely turned me around on the subject of the androids. It suddenly hit home that maybe a bunch of people who have no concept for the suffering of others shouldn't be left to run around free. The ever-dwindling amount of wildlife on Earth has led to a massive social emphasis on owning an animal of some sort. There's a powerful stigma to not having at least a small critter to look after, so much so that pet shop prices skyrocket and a booming market for uber-realistic electronic animals springs up for people who can't afford real ones. Deckard starts the book feeling depressed that he only has an electronic sheep to look after as his real one had died. After killing 3 of the Andes, he takes all the bounty money and spends it on a goat, which brings him and his missus no end of joy. Unfortunately, at the end he finds out that Rachel got revenge on him for killing her people by throwing his new pet off the roof of a skyscraper. The Dom's final thoughts. So, yeah, as I was expecting to, I ended up being faced with a good film, but shit adaptation. Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep is a depressing tale about mankind desperately clinging on to the last remnants of a dying world. It deals with the blurry line between the real and the imaginary, the effects of mental health issues, and many different kinds of hypocrisy. Blade Runner is more of a story about one man's journey into discovering who he really is. It's laden with religious symbolism and covers themes such as fear and then acceptance of one's own mortality, and of course there's the ever popular message to not let big corporations play God. There's undeniably pros and cons to both the film and the book, but both very much get a 100% recommendation from me. If you were to put a gun to my head and demand to know which one I thought was better, I'd probably have to side with Sir Ridley. While he obviously couldn't resist the urge to make things less morally ambiguous by having the replicants be scary psychopaths, and he may have oversexed things up a little bit, he also succeeded where Dick failed when it came to making characters we would actually give a shit about. And my goodness, those visuals and that soundtrack. Oddly enough, I think the main reasons the inaccuracies of this particular adaptation don't faze me is tied into the same reasons that most adaptations piss me the hell off. Filmmakers often want to inherit a book's fanbase to get a boost at the box office, but then don't want to be held accountable for their lack of respect to the original story. So Ridley changed the name. He then openly admitted it was only loosely based on it beforehand. He couldn't have made it more clear that he had just been inspired by the book, but was definitely going to do his own thing with it. He didn't try to have his cake and eat it, and sweet mercy, I respect him for that.